Well, I was just going to make a note with Tammy about finding housing for seniors. When we moved here, I moved my mom down from Spokane, and she had a long journey of dementia for about 11 years. And fortunately, there was an opening at Creekside Senior Living right off of White Avenue. And I really learned to appreciate that type of facility. I believe we need a lot more. That single level, she geared, for a wheelchair if she needed. But she did end up on Medicaid, her Social Security, my dad's VA death benefit, because unfortunately, due to her dementia, she had exhausted all of her personal finances. And if it hadn't been for those features, I'm not sure how I would have been able to care for her. But like Creekside Senior Living, it was really a godsend for my mom as she progressed through more assisted living, adult family, and then she was in Avalon in Pullman. But as Tammy's saying, I see that coming down the road, and I think our communities need to set aside land. I love looking at you. mandatory in our area, because like in my home, there is no way I could have cared for her in my home, the floor plan. It just would never have worked. So I think that's something that we know is coming, but some people are looking at it like with just one eye. So thank you, Tammy, for bringing that up. But I will say I was very impressed with Creekside Senior Living and the whole layout on that. We need more.
That was going to be my question for Bill, frankly. So, are there plans for more housing for low-income seniors?
For the city, we don't construct housing. And so I've not heard of any of the private projects that are currently looking to do more senior projects. I think the Creekside project was done in 2006 or 7 by the same housing development group out of Hayden, Idaho, that did the project on South Main. But Creekside was specific on White Avenue, specific for senior housing, single level. And those are tax credit projects that they can apply for through the state, and helps them with some financial assistance to be able to afford to be able to provide housing to those of low and moderate income. We've not heard of another project on the horizon. We can only zone land to be available for residential development, but we really can't dictate what type of development occurs there. And that is a limitation that we have. So I've not heard of any in the pipeline.
Well, I'm going to take facilitators' prerogative and just add to that, then wondering what incentives might come to pass that would incentivize universal design, the wider hallways, the higher dishwashers, the single-story development, that sort of thing. What tools does the city have, or some of these assistive funding agencies have to encourage developers to do that sort of construction?
Within the city, we have very limited tools to encourage that type of construction practice. We can only hold them, and by the state, we're limited to only holding to the minimum building code requirements as adopted by the state. So any additional above and beyond, we really don't have any tools available. We have some provisions in projects that may go through plan unit development, where there are some density bonuses or maybe some other credits that can be applied. But really, we're fairly limited in Idaho. Idaho is a very strong property rights state. It is a state in which the city cannot dictate housing type, cannot dictate the construction of affordable housing. So you oftentimes hear the term inclusionary housing in other states, where in large residential developments and subdivisions, they are required to build a certain number of units that are for low to moderate income individuals. Valley County tried that, as did McCall, and the Board of Realtors of the state took it to the Supreme Court, and that was deemed unconstitutional in the state of Idaho. And so we cannot dictate the type of unit, we cannot dictate the income level that they're available for, and we have very little opportunities, very little incentives that we can provide to try to incentivize that. So it's largely up to the market. We try to connect those that are looking for that housing type to developers and to realtors to help try to convince the market that there's a demand for the product, because all developers wish to do is to build a product that's going to be accepted by the market, and they can sell and earn a living, and that's what they do. And so we need to try to convince them that there's a market for that here, and that product should be constructed. And we've been working on that on the Dumas Street site, where we were contacted by a number of individuals looking for that kind of a condo close to the downtown, walking distance, and put them in contact with the developer to try to encourage that the project go the route of condo ownership units rather than just traditional rental units, which was another option they were considering. So we're still have our fingers crossed that's the path they will take, and hopeful that that'll happen, but we have somewhat limited tools at our disposal with the city.
Thank you. Yes, you.
I have a question, I guess it'd be for you. What's Moscow's policy on like these ADUs, letting people, whatever criteria, square footage on a lot or something, and let somebody build a little cottage in the backyard for seniors, their in-laws, whatever. But there's a lot of big lots, areas within Moscow, and I haven't heard, is there ADUs like a lot of cities are going to now?
About 3 years. Sure, so an accessory dwelling unit is just a small apartment. Oftentimes there's a mother-in-law apartment, maybe in the basement, but they may be in a detached cottage in the backyard too. So it's a small-scale accessory dwelling unit, complete housekeeping facilities, small-scale unit. So about 4 years ago now, we amended the code to allow ADUs by right in all residential zoning districts in the city. So they are permissible. They're intended to be small-scale, so they're limited to 600 square feet, and they're generally limited to 2 occupants, and there is an owner occupancy requirement that they have to sign. It's a deed restriction on the property that says the owner of the property will reside either in the home or in the ADU. And they can go through a transition, because it can be that it may be a young family that wants an ADU for some income generation. The kids, maybe they have a boomerang kid that comes back and wants to live in the ADU in the backyard, and then maybe once the kids leave the house, they want to rent out the house to supplement their income and live in the smaller ADU.
So that option is available?
That is available by right in all zoning districts. We probably, I should have got the number, but we have had an uptick this year. I think we probably permitted nearly 20 of those this year.
Yeah,
It was slow to begin with, but we've had many more of those units over the course of this year. So that's by right that we have. And it's intended to provide that opportunity for multi-generational housing, providing that location for a parent to live in close, with some independence, but close to home, so you can take care of them, or just as the owner cycles through life.
Yes, John?
How long has that state law been where you are restricted on saying you'd like some place set aside for senior housing?
About 12 to 13 years ago is when that
So we
was
have a
reformed.
newly elected state senator who's going to bring this to our legislature and say, wait a minute, because we really do need some more senior housing. And then just another question, the Harvest Hills, I didn't realize it was a mixed zone. What kind of business is going in there? Or
So at this point, we don't know. So it's neighborhood business, so it can allow like daycare facilities, could allow small grocery corner market, could be restaurants, cafe, so
So
small
all it
scale.
is now is just zone there, and there's nobody that says, I want to go in there.
Correct. The only thing that I've heard on the site is the owner is looking at doing a planned unit development on the property that would include, so for example, like the cottages on Pinecone Road, some sort of kind of clustered PUD housing project on the site with some commercial accessory facilities, so some sort of coffee shop, restaurant use there. We haven't seen anything on it, but that's what we've heard they're considering for that site.
So Joan's question, for those who didn't hear it, pertained to the Harvest Hills site.
On Mountain
Just
View.
on Mountain
Near
View,
Mountain View.
at the terminus of 3rd Street. Another
To add
question?
more traffic to Mountain.
Karen?
Yeah, I noticed on the Indian Hills development that you have multifamily buildings right next to single family, and I thought duplexes were supposed to moderate that density one from another.
So if I mention, in that area, you've got the Grove, this is the multifamily project that's there. There are some three two-family lots that are between them and the Grove. And so you've got the Grove, you have then that steep cut hillside that's not going to be developed. So it's the one that has a couple retaining wall tiers to it that goes up to the
Well,
single
I'm
family.
talking about Lane Street and, what is that called? Indian Hills Drive, isn't it?
Oh,
Leadville?
on the east end.
Yeah.
So there is multifamily, but it goes from single family to multifamily there on that east side, you're correct.
Yeah. Just wasn't there in the zoning code that you had to moderate with duplexes?
It's not dictated that that's the case. It is something that oftentimes does occur, that we make a transition of zoning districts from single family to two family, then to multifamily. And that location, it was a very large lot, and it really didn't suit itself to two-family development. with streets, and so they ended up doing multifamily development there.
Well, we've reached that 1 o'clock witching hour. If somebody has a burning question, we'll take one more question. Otherwise, I hope our panelists can linger a little bit to respond to you individually. Yeah.
Oh, that's one over there. Go ahead. I'll ask her after this.
Were you standing for a question, sir? No. Go ahead, Randy.
Okay, so has there been any trend of people buying homes and converting them to Airbnbs, and is that problematic? What do you see happening here also with that?
Personally, I have not seen that. Most, 99.9% of all of the homes that I sell are for people to live, or they might be buying it for their student who's going to U of I and they're going to live there for 4 years. But I have not seen, I know there is that issue going on the Oregon coast, vacation rentals and Airbnbs, and they're kind of causing some, it's a new zoning, and they're causing some issues. I have not seen that anywhere. I do know we have more Airbnbs that are using their walkout basements and so forth for that, but I have not had anyone specifically buy just for that.
Could you put a tiny house ADU and use it as strictly as a Airbnb, or is that a separate category?
So that's a fun topic. So that's something we've been talking about internally in the department, because we have not, so we have kind of a little bit of disparity in the zoning code currently, and it's a project we've got lined up for this upcoming year to look at, is that currently if you rent out an entire dwelling unit, we don't regulate the duration of rental. So you rent out a house, you can rent it by the day, you can rent it by the month, you can rent it by the year, at least. So in the code, we don't regulate the duration of rental. We do regulate bed and breakfast inns, which require a conditional use permit, and that's if the owner occupies occupies the dwelling and then rents out rooms for people to live on less than a weekly basis. So we kind of have this disparity in the code where if the owner is occupying the home and is renting out a couple bedrooms for the night for a mom's dad's weekend or football game, they're generally going to supervise their guests better and probably would have less impact on the neighborhood. But if you rent out an entire home, so in that instance, the owner has to get a conditional use permit to do that. In the other instance, if you rent out the entire house, or let's say it's an ADU that they put strictly to Airbnb use, there's no conditional use permit, the ADU is by right, the owner's residing in one of the two, and there's no requirement for them to go and get a conditional use permit. So there's a little disparity between the two that the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to talk about this year. It's been one of those where we have had very few complaints about Airbnb use, so, and we know we have at least 60, I think, operating in town probably. And we have issued a few CUs for some, and many others have just opened in the backyard and they're doing it. It's a tough one because we are a university community, we have a lot of events, and they play an important role in providing some lodging that doesn't necessarily justify building a new hotel for, but can pick up those peak demands. And it gives people a little bit extra income, and we haven't had a lot of complaints from neighbors about the impacts, except one that was using their RV in the backyard, and that one we had to deal with. But we've had very little impact. So we've been kind of watching it. The second thing is this has been a topic of the state legislature as well, and cities have also been preempted from outright denial of Airbnbs in their communities. So that happened in the past two legislative sessions that they amended the state law to require local communities to treat it as a residential use, to not prohibit it, but you can have reasonably regulated for public health, safety, and welfare. So there's some general parameters, but you are essentially prohibited from limiting it. We're not necessarily, I mean, we are a university community, we get the concentrations during those weekend events, but we're not a resort community. So McCall is going through this, all the Oregon coastal towns, and it's where people are buying properties and transitioning just for that use because they can make much more money doing that than renting it, to an occupant for a year. We don't have the constant demand here that I see people buying units entirely for that purpose. I am aware of a couple that's happened, but not a large number. But it is something we're going to look at. We have to take into consideration and get interpretation from the city attorney about the state statute that was recently passed that limits our ability to regulate. And we would really like to address that disparity. But most of all, we haven't seen much negative impact from the use. It's been pretty modest, and we don't see entire neighborhoods transitioning to rental, vacation rental homes, which is what you see in a lot of those resort communities. So, and I don't necessarily see that in our future. I see the football games and the moms and dads weekends and graduations, those filling a niche need for lodging in the community.
So the message is stay tuned for next session's League of Women Voters forums on new topics, attend Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, and thank you all for coming. Please say one more thank you.